digital special. Pops in Seoul, Thursday at 6:25 p.m. Love it. Say it. Discover the latest and the hottest trends in Japan. Feel the pulse of the vibrant and fabulous culture. JP Time TV, today at 6:25 p.m. What happens out there is real. Get the latest European news and current affairs. Whatever happens, when it happens, you're always the first to know. Check in current news. European Journal, every Monday night at 8. Be cool. Keep updated with the international music scene. Warner Music Power Station, Thursday night at 10.
郊外遠足幾時都要提高警覺，防止山火。要小心處理火種，確保火種完全熄滅先至好離開。
咦，好似有山火喎，不如去第二度行咯。
哇！
前面有山火，你哋好快啲走啦，你都唔好行過去啦。
明知前面有危險，梗係即刻掉頭走啦。行山啫，唔使揾命搏嘅。防止山火護林木，速離險境自醒目。
What the health is all about. They say it can be anything that improves the quality of life. Every week, the specialists will come on the show to give you tips on beauty and health. They will keep it simple, keep it real, and keep you in good shape. Tonight at 7.
Hello and welcome to a look back at the year 2012. I'm Heyling Chan. In this part of the program, we look at what the world went through this year, starting with China. It was the dawn of a new China this year as the nation unveiled the next generation of leaders and sent its first female astronaut to the final frontier. But overshadowing China's proudest moments was the Communist Party having to deal with its biggest corruption scandal in decades.
Unlike the US elections, there were no TV debates, glitzy conventions or open soliciting for votes when President Hu Jintao and the men who ruled China gave way to a new generation of leaders. Xi Jinping led the new Politburo Standing Committee, the country's most powerful body, out onto the stage in Beijing's Great Hall of the People, signalling his elevation to the top of the party. That sets the stage for him to take over as president from Hu Jintao, under whose administration China has seen 10 years of extraordinary growth. Joining Xi in the new lineup was Li Keqiang, the man set to succeed Premier Wen Jiabao, Zhang Dejiang, Yu Zhengsheng, Liu Yunshan, Wang Qishan and Zhang Gaoli. The 7 men who will guide the world's second-largest economy are seen as politically conservative, and perceived reformers like Li Yuanqiao, the head of the party's organization department, and Wang Yang, the party chief of Guangdong province, did not get promoted. On another significant note, Hu's predecessor Jiang Zemin managed to fill the top governing body with his allies, in a reflection of how much power he still wields behind the scenes. To Hu's credit, he also handed over to Xi the job of heading China's powerful Central Military Commission, in stark contrast to Jiang, who held on to that position for months after he relinquished the Communist Party leader's post to Hu Jintao. Barely after he was named the new head of the party, Xi warned ministers that they must fight corruption or risk ruining the country. Strong words that came after a series of corruption investigations that targeted high-level leaders in recent years. And this year saw the biggest scandal in decades, the downfall of Chongqing's charismatic and ambitious party boss, Bo Xilai. Bo was a rising star destined to join the ranks of the country's top leaders, until his wife, Gu Kai-lai, was accused of murdering British businessman Neil Hayward, a close family associate. Gu was convicted and given a suspended death sentence in August. Bo's political career unravelled the moment his right-hand man, Chongqing police chief Wang Lijun, fled to the US consulate in nearby Chengdu and spilled the beans. In September, Wang was convicted of defection, helping to cover up Haywood's murder and other crimes. Guo himself has been stripped of all his posts and faces prosecution for covering up the murder and for corruption in the final chapter of a scandal that has shaken the Communist Party to its core. This was also a year of dissident drama in China. Blind rights activist Chen Guangcheng arrived in the US in May, bringing an end to a diplomatic standoff between Beijing and Washington that erupted after he escaped from 19 months of house arrest and sought asylum in the American embassy in Beijing. The blind, self-taught lawyer was treated like a celebrity by his American supporters, who gave him a fellowship at New York University. Beijing allowed him to leave the country after he spent days in hospital, being treated for a leg injury he suffered during his daring escape. His family was left behind to suffer the consequences. Chen's nephew, Chen Ge-gui, was jailed for more than 3 years in November after being charged with attacking officials who burst into his home on the 27th of April. Chen said the jailing of his nephew was based on trumped-up charges. In June, China set aside its earthly troubles and sent its international image soaring with the launch of its most ambitious space mission yet. The Shenzhou 9, carrying its first female astronaut, Liu Yang, and 2 male colleagues, successfully lifted off from the Jiuquan Launch Center on the edge of the Gobi Desert. The mission included remote-controlled and piloted dockings of the Shenzhou 9 with the prototype space lab Tiangong-1, as well as medical monitoring of the astronauts as part of preparations for manning a permanent space station. Every move of the mission was beamed across a country gripped with patriotic pride. The Shenzhou 9 returned safely to Earth on the 29th of June. Much of this year was dominated by China's row with its neighbours over ownership of the tiny uninhabited Diaoyu Islands. Tensions reached boiling point when a group of activists from Hong Kong sailed to the islands and planted the national flag on a rocky outcrop after a confrontation with the Japanese Coast Guard. They were promptly arrested, but sent home later without being prosecuted to pacify an angry China. The dispute over the islands flared after the Japanese government bought them from their owner to head off a planned purchase by Tokyo's nationalist governor, which could have made matters worse. The dispute saw some ugly scenes as angry mobs went on the rampage across China, attacking Japanese businesses and even Chinese citizens driving Japanese cars, and prompting Japan to demand that Beijing protect its citizens. While China's nervous neighbours fretted over Beijing's growing presence in the South China Sea, the PLA conducted the first takeoff and landing of a fighter jet on its first aircraft carrier, the Liaoning, in November. While the carrier is far from fully operational, it extends Beijing's ability to project its growing military might in territorial disputes in the years to come.
It's been a big year in U.S. politics, with the battle for the White House dominating headlines. In the end, Democratic President Barack Obama beat his Republican rival Mitt Romney to win a second term after a bitter multi-billion-dollar campaign that was interrupted by a massive storm that killed more than 120 people. When the U.S. holds presidential elections, the world watches. And this year's big race attracted even more attention because of doubts over whether Barack Obama would win a second term. America's first black president started off unchallenged for the nomination of the Democratic Party and maximized his time by bashing the Republican economic recovery plan, a key election issue.
It's not a plan to create jobs. It is not a plan to reduce the deficit. It is not a plan to build our middle class. It is not a plan to move our economy forward.
Over in the Republican Party, a handful of candidates were vying for the nomination.
I look forward to the contest to come, but we're going to take our message of liberty and prosperity to every corner of the country.
Mitt Romney has the same positions as Barack Obama, and in fact, would not be the best person to come up and fight for your voices for freedom in America.
I can arouse people. And if we can pit people power against money power, I'm convinced we can win.
Although Rick Santorum mounted a strong challenge to frontrunner Mitt Romney, he made a surprise announcement in April that he would suspend his campaign. That left the former Massachusetts governor the undisputed Republican nominee.
Our nation depends on it. The peace and freedom of the world require it. And with your help, we will deliver it. Let us begin that future for America tonight.
Obama was formally endorsed by the Democratic Party in September.
We don't turn back. We leave no one behind. We pull each other up. We draw strength from our victories, and we learn from our mistakes. But we keep our eyes fixed on that distant horizon, knowing that Providence is with us.
In the last of 3 presidential debates in October, both candidates took aim at China to strike a chord with voters worried about losing jobs to cheap labor overseas.
I've watched year in and year out as companies have shut down and people have lost their jobs because China has not played by the same rules.
And I know Americans had seen jobs being shipped overseas, businesses and workers not getting a level playing field when it came to trade. And that's the reason why I set up a trade task force to go after cheaters when it came to international trade.
But both Romney and Obama's campaigns had to be temporarily halted when Superstorm Sandy lashed the East Coast in October. More than 120 people were killed.
When the storm hit, President Obama had to take off his campaigner-in-chief hat and resume the responsibilities of the presidency. And when he did that, he got to look like a leader. He was being a leader. He got to go comfort voters. Meanwhile, Governor Romney, who was experiencing a bit of a resurgence in the campaign, had to go back to being a private citizen.
With relief efforts underway, the presidential elections were held on the 6th of November after the most expensive campaign in U.S. history, dominated by mudslinging and personal attacks. The popular vote was very close, with Obama getting only 51% of support to Romney's 48%. But in the Electoral College votes, which decide the winner, Obama scored a decisive victory to secure another 4 years in office.
We are greater than the sum of our individual ambitions, and we remain more than a collection of red states and blue states. We are and forever will be the United States of America.
This year had more than its share of man-made tragedies around the world. Among the worst was a shooting massacre at a packed cinema in the U.S., while the sinking of a luxury cruise liner off the Italian coast made global headlines.
The situation is under control.
On the 13th of January, the massive cruise ship Costa Concordia hit a reef near the Italian coastal town of Giglio and capsized, killing 32 people. A pre-trial hearing blamed the ship's captain, Francesco Schettino. He apologized for abandoning the vessel before his passengers. At a platinum mine in northeast South Africa, 44 striking workers demanding better pay were killed during a violent confrontation with police on the 16th of August. 34 of those who died during weeks of unrest at the Lonmin-owned Marikana mine were shot dead by officers ordered to break up their protest. South African President Jacob Zuma called it the bloodiest security operation since the end of white rule in his country and ordered an inquiry. In March, a US soldier went on a killing spree in a village in Afghanistan, gunning down 16 civilians, including 9 children. Staff Sergeant Robert Bales allegedly walked off his base in southern Kandahar province and slaughtered his victims inside their houses before setting fire to them. He's been charged with 17 counts of murder and is being held in a maximum security prison in the US. Some Americans sympathized with Bales, saying he was a victim of the extreme pressures of war. The US is no stranger to gun violence, but Americans were traumatized by a particularly shocking case of mass murder in July. During a midnight screening in Aurora, Colorado, the latest Batman film turned into a real-life nightmare when a gunman opened fire in a packed cinema, killing 12 people and wounding 60 others. The killer, James Holmes, was arrested in a nearby car park and told authorities he'd booby-trapped his home with explosives. His lawyers claim he is mentally ill, while his apparently drugged state in court sparked conspiracy theories about him being part of a mind control program. The massacre triggered the gun control debate, which surfaces every time there's a shooting in the US and then dies down until the next outbreak of violence.
I hope that
over the next several days, next several weeks, and next several months, we all reflect on how we can do something about some of the senseless violence that ends up marring this country.
But nothing was done and the issue was forgotten until this month when something much worse happened. A young gunman slaughtered 26 people, 20 of them children aged between 6 and 7, at a primary school in Connecticut. Adam Lanza shot and killed his mother in their home in Newtown before driving her car to the school and opening fire with an assault rifle and then turning the gun on himself. Once again, Obama found himself under pressure to do something about gun violence.
Can we say that we're truly doing enough to give all the children of this country the chance they deserve to live out their lives in happiness and with purpose? I've been reflecting on this the last few days, and if we're honest with ourselves, the answer is no. We're not doing enough, and we will have to change.
That change may be just wishful thinking, as no US president would commit political suicide by taking on America's powerful gun lobby.
We'll be back after the break with more headlines from 2012, including Europe's economic woes and upheavals in the Middle East. Stay with us.
One hour before the disaster hit the town of Uriaj, the victims were neither running nor hiding. The tsunami claimed 700 lives. Could the casualties have been lower if they made a different decision? Inside story of the 3/11 earthquake, 70 minutes of tsunami. How did people react? Saturday night at 10.
They can drive you nuts. From the most powerful roaring on Earth to the sexiest bodies you will ever see. They're surely every man's dream. Drive It, every Monday evening at 6:55.
First TV show ever to bring you Hong Kong's real nightlife. With exclusive interviews of the hottest DJs in the world. And amazingly more. Magnum Music Station, every Thursday night at 12:50 a.m.
Nothing is more interesting to Dr. Young than to talk about art and beauty. On Dr. C.K. Young's Studio. He and his friends are going to show you a whole new perspective on art, culture and life. Dr. C.K. Young's Studio, Sunday morning at 10:30.
The MPF Employee Choice Arrangement is now in effect. Here are a few tactics to be the boss of your MPF. Tactic 1. Check every detail. Every detail of the new arrangement should be carefully scrutinized. Tactic 2. Refuse to follow a fad. There's no hurry to transfer your MPF. Tactic 3. Think carefully before taking action. Carefully consider the 4 major factors. Remember, only the employee's portion of accrued benefits can be transferred. Your MPF, your choice.
Singapore may be small, though it definitely has a huge ambition. After billions of dollars have been spent to nurture a creative community, it has succeeded in some way and failed in others. How much more can its government do? All About documentary, Asian Century, Thursday night at 10:05.
Conflicts and politics dominated the headlines in 2012, but it's the health of the global economy that's had and will continue to have the biggest impact on everyone. The world is yet to fully recover from the recession that began 4 years ago, and there are mixed signals about whether the worst is really over.
In an ironic twist, Greece, the sick man of Europe, began the year with doctors and pharmacists going on strike to protest against cuts in medical spending. That set the tone for the rest of the year. The strikes and violent protests rocked the country. Greece is suffering from an acute debt crisis caused by years of overspending. The remedy prescribed by its creditors called for a massive dose of austerity. That meant huge cuts in civil service jobs, pay and pension, tax increases, and large-scale layoffs. The savings would help pay off the country's mountain of debts, but for ordinary Greeks, the belt-tightening that was imposed on them was too bitter a pill to swallow. So they took to the streets to protest, but to no avail. To stave off bankruptcy, the government in Athens endorsed and implemented the unpopular measures in return for bailout funds. While Greece was portrayed as the rotten apple, one that could topple the entire Eurozone, the economic malaise runs deeper. The spectre of another recession looms over the continent, with its consequences threatening to spread beyond its shores. Austerity was the watchword, an antidote to recession, so claimed some economists. But others say more public money should be invested to create employment. While the austerity versus recovery debate raged on in Europe, across the Atlantic, another economic crisis continued to simmer amid an election campaign. President Barack Obama was re-elected mainly on the hope that he, and not his Republican rival Mitt Romney, will be able to end the unemployment nightmare. About 8% of the US workforce is unemployed, affecting 12.3 million Americans. In the age of globalization, the economic problems in the US and the Eurozone have spilled over to the rest of the world. Weakening demand in those two giant markets resulted in lower exports from developing countries, leading to factory closures and job losses. It was China that the world turned to again in the hope of better times. China, now the world's second biggest economy, has also had trouble as problems suffered by its biggest trade partners led to a drop in exports. But the mainland has a fallback. Its vast population helped offset the losses in exports. Still, China has had to cut its economic targets. After recording growth of 10% a year for the past 2 decades, Beijing lowered its goals and would be happy if this year's gross domestic product reaches 7.5%. China has also managed to tame inflation, and the consumer price index for the whole year is likely to be well below the official target of 4%. With prospects looking brighter, China's new lineup of top members in the ruling Communist Party could have an easier job in the coming year.
It was another turbulent year in the Middle East as Arab Spring revolutionaries returned to the streets, unhappy with the new leaders they'd helped bring to power after ousting the old ones, nowhere more so than in Egypt. Syrian rebels fought to topple their leader throughout the year, and they're still at it, with the help of Western governments. Over in the West Bank and the Gaza Strip, there are few signs of change for the Palestinians, despite a landmark vote at the United Nations indirectly recognizing statehood for them.
Egypt emerged from 2011 with the promise of a new era just around the corner, following the revolution that ended decades of Hosni Mubarak's rule. May saw relatively unknown Muslim Brotherhood candidate Mohamed Morsi lead the first round of voting in a presidential election and eventually win by a sliver of votes in June. His first step was to strip powers from the army, which had ruled since Mubarak's ousting. Days after Morsi was sworn in, a court sentenced Mubarak to life in prison for his involvement in the killing of protesters in the uprising that ousted him a year earlier. Over in freshly liberated Libya, armed gangs that helped oust and kill former leader Muammar Gaddafi continue to run free and refuse to disarm, despite being ordered to by the new Western-backed government. On September the 11th, an attack on the US embassy in Benghazi killed Ambassador Christopher Stevens and several employees. While Egyptians and Libyans are still coming to terms with the aftermath of the so-called Arab Spring, Syrians are still in the thick of it. The year began with the rebel coalition, the Free Syria Army, killing 26 people, mostly civilians, in a bomb attack on the capital, Damascus. Throughout the year, government forces pounded rebel areas, ignoring complaints from the West about civilians dying in large numbers. Both sides blamed each other for much of the bloodshed. February saw the first of several UN meetings aimed at punishing President Bashar al-Assad's government. But in all of them, the US and its European allies blamed the violence solely on Assad and not the rebels, prompting Russia and China to block them. International efforts throughout the year to end Israel's blockade on the Gaza Strip failed. In January, peace talks resumed after more than 16 months. But throughout the year, Israel continued building illegal settlements on occupied Palestinian land, an issue considered one of the biggest obstacles to peace. In November, the United Nations General Assembly voted overwhelmingly to upgrade Palestine to observer status, a largely symbolic move, but also an indirect recognition of Palestinian statehood. It was celebrated across the Palestinian territories. The US and Israel called the move counterproductive to the peace movement. Earlier in the month, Israel assassinated Hamas military chief Ahmed Jabari, claiming it was to stop rocket attacks on its citizens. In retaliation, Palestinian militants fired rockets into Israel, killing 3 people. The cross-border conflict escalated, with Israel bombarding Gaza City for a week, killing up to 177 people, many of them women and children. The conflict ended in a ceasefire deal, which included a partial lifting of Israel's blockade on Gaza. Both sides claimed victory in the brief war. The deal was brokered by Egypt's Morsi, winning him international praise, although it was short-lived, as just days later he issued a decree that forbid legal challenges to his decisions. That move brought international criticism.
We call on Egypt's leaders to ensure that the outcome protects the democratic promise of the revolution for all Egyptians.
After 2 weeks of mass protests by many who felt he was becoming just like Mubarak, he scrapped the decree, but insisted on going ahead with a referendum on a new constitution that critics argued had an Islamist bias. But the protests continued, so he did another U-turn, calling on the army for help and reinstating its power to arrest people. With frequent violent demonstrations, and since the vast majority of the country didn't vote for him, some argue the Egyptians are worse off than they were before the revolution, as tourism has gone down, unemployment is up and the people are divided.
And that brings us to the end of the programme. We leave you now with memories of famous faces who left us this year. I'm Heyling Chan. From all of us at ATV News, good night and all the best for 2013.
Coming up, Stories from Afar 1.
You are the sweetest love song in the world. Now I can't hear any other thing.
Keeping them honest is what we do. So many questions out there, someone has to ask. Face-to-face challenge. And all the hottest topics are only on Newsline. Tonight at 8. Muslims are everywhere. They can be your neighbours or business partners. So what can happen when they become Japanese citizens? All About Documentary, 72 hours, Monday night at 10.
A girl may choose to be miserable when she's feeling low. But Kat is no ordinary girl. She has a plan, and that won't work without a hot date, a jealous ex-fiancé, and her desperate single friends. Deborah Messing, Dermot Mulroney, Amy Adams. The Wedding Date, Tuesday night at 9. From the best-selling American author of more than 50 books, Dr. Stanley has spread his messages across many countries to heal people's souls. Learn to control your life. Don't be afraid. In touch with Dr. Charles Stanley, today at 2 p.m. An eye-opening journey for each one of them.
Very beautiful eyes.
It takes a little bit of courage, a little bit of curiosity. New lives will begin before they know it. ATV World Movie Spectacular, The Band's Visit, tonight at 9. Please note the following programme will be broadcast in Putonghua.